Welcome back, everybody. We've got quite the deep dive in store for us today.
Oh,
It's
no.
all about answering the call. And we're looking at the Catholic readings for February 9th, 2025.
The fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time.
Yes, exactly. The fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time.
Yeah.
And we've got Isaiah, we've got Psalms, we've got Paul
Slog.
and Luke. So really spanning the whole experience there.
Yeah, a really good spread.
Yeah, a really good spread. That's a good way to put it. And it's interesting to me because each of these readings really focuses on an encounter with the divine
Right.
and the call to action that follows.
Yeah.
So it's not just about like the belief or the idea, but like what do you actually do when you are confronted with something bigger than yourself?
It's that lived experience.
Yeah, that lived experience. So let's start with Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8.
Okay.
And Isaiah has this very dramatic vision of God in the temple.
Right.
And it describes a high throne and flowing robes, these angelic beings called seraphim.
And the seraphims are actually calling out, holy, holy, holy.
Yeah, it's powerful imagery.
Yes, and it's worth noting that the repetition there, the holy, 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 actually emphasizes just how transcendent God is.
Wow. Yeah.
It's like God is holy, holy, holy to the highest degree.
It's not just a little holy.
Right. It's
like holy times 3.
Yes, exactly.
And so, this is not like a quiet contemplative moment for Isaiah.
No,
The text even describes the door shaking, the house filling up with smoke.
it's awe-inspiring, right?
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, I would be terrified.
I mean, I think anyone would be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I would be very scared. And then, of course, we have Isaiah's reaction to all of this. He says, "Woe is me, I am doomed. I am a man of unclean lips."
And, for someone who might not be familiar with this text, unclean lips might sound a little strange.
Yeah, what does that even mean?
Yeah, like just bad language. But it signified more than that in ancient Israel. It was really about spiritual impurity, being separated from God.
So Isaiah is in the presence of this divine holiness, and he immediately becomes aware of his own shortcomings.
Right, and his unworthiness to be in that presence.
So it's not just about feeling unworthy, it's about feeling unable to speak truth or prophecy because of that unworthiness.
That's a really good point. You have to remember that Isaiah is a prophet.
Right?
And prophets are called to speak God's word. But in order to speak for God, they need to be pure, set apart.
So this idea of unclean lips is really about being unable to fulfill his role as a prophet.
Precisely.
And then we have this incredibly vivid image, a burning coal. A seraphim takes a burning coal from the altar and touches Isaiah's lips with it.
To purify him.
I can't even imagine what that would feel like.
I mean, talk about an intense experience.
Yeah, it's not exactly a gentle cleansing.
No, not at all.
But it's a powerful symbol.
Absolutely. The burning coal is about removing whatever's making him unfit to speak for God.
It's like a reset, a fresh start.
Exactly. And that purification enables him to answer the call when God asks, "Whom shall I send?"
And he responds, "Here I am, send me." And he doesn't even hesitate. It's a complete 180 from his initial fear and despair.
Right. It's incredible. The encounter with the divine, while scary at first, ultimately empowers him.
It's like facing your fears and coming out stronger on the other side.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, this reminds me of Psalm 138,
Oh, yes.
which is all about gratitude and praise for God's faithfulness. But don't you think there's also a sense of mission there, like an underlying call to action?
Absolutely. The psalmist sings, "Your right hand saves me. The Lord will complete what he has done for me." And I think that trust in God's guiding hand is a call to live a life of purpose.
So it's not necessarily a one-time dramatic event like Isaiah's vision, but
Right.
more like an unfolding journey where we become increasingly aware of God's presence and purpose for our lives.
It's beautiful how it contrasts with Isaiah's dramatic encounter, isn't it?
It is. Sometimes the call is a gentle nudge, a subtle awareness that grows over time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a burning coal to the face.
Well, hopefully not literally.
No, not literally. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It can be intense.
It can be a powerful wake-up call.
Speaking of journeys, let's shift gears to Paul.
Okay.
In his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 15, verses 1 through 11, Paul is reminding the Corinthians about the core message of the gospel, Christ's death and resurrection.
Right.
And he calls it the gospel I preach to you, which you received.
Yes.
And what's interesting is how this highlights the active nature of early Christian faith.
It wasn't passive.
Yeah, it wasn't just about like intellectually believing certain facts,
No.
but it was about receiving this good news and letting it transform your life.
It's about living it out, right?
Yeah, it's about embodying it, living it out. And Paul goes on to list all these people who saw the resurrected Jesus: Cephas, the 12, more than 500 brothers at once.
Almost like he's presenting evidence, right?
Yeah, like a legal defense. I mean, was he anticipating skepticism about the resurrection even back then?
I think that's a very insightful observation. Remember, for the early Christian community, these eyewitness accounts were foundational.
Oh, yeah.
Their belief wasn't based on hearsay or blind faith.
It was rooted in something real and tangible.
Exactly.
They had actual witnesses.
They did.
And that brings us to Paul himself. I mean, he went from persecuting Christians to becoming one of the most influential figures in the early church.
Talk about a transformation.
Yeah, that's quite a journey. I mean, wouldn't you say there's an echo of Isaiah's experience here?
Absolutely. Both Isaiah and Paul had these transformative encounters that led them to dedicate their lives to spreading the message they received.
So it wasn't just about the encounter itself,
Right.
but about how that encounter reshaped their sense of purpose and mission in the world.
It changed everything for them.
It's like answering the call isn't just about a single moment, but about how that moment ripples out and affects everything that comes after.
It sets you on a new path.
So we've gone from Isaiah's grand vision of God in the temple to Paul's personal encounter with the risen Christ.
Two very different experiences.
And yet they both highlight the power of answering the call, even when it's scary, even when we feel unworthy.
It's about trusting that something bigger than ourselves is at work.
And speaking of trusting something bigger than ourselves, what happens when the call comes from a source we least expect, like in Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11?
That's where we find Simon Peter, a fisherman, having an encounter with Jesus that totally upends his life.
So we're on the Lake of Gennesaret.
Beautiful setting.
Jesus is teaching a large crowd from the shore.
Right.
And Simon Peter and his fellow fishermen are washing their nets after a long, unsuccessful night of fishing.
I imagine they're exhausted and probably a bit discouraged.
Yeah, I mean, they've been working all night and haven't caught anything. Then Jesus steps into Simon Peter's boat
Oh, wow.
and asks him to put out a little from the shore so he can continue teaching.
It seems like a simple request.
It does, but it sets the stage for something extraordinary.
It always starts small, doesn't it?
And then after Jesus finishes teaching, he tells Simon Peter to do something that must have seemed crazy. Put out into deep water and lower your nets for a catch.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
After they've been fishing all night?
Yeah, can you imagine being Simon Peter in that moment? He's probably thinking, we just spent all night trying to catch fish and we got nothing. Now this teacher wants us to go back out there. It just doesn't make sense.
It seems counterintuitive, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, if you were Simon Peter, wouldn't you be skeptical?
Oh, definitely.
And Simon Peter actually voices his doubt. He says to Jesus, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will lower the nets. It's interesting, he's wrestling with his own logic and experience, but he still chooses to obey.
There's a real tension there between doubt and obedience.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that leap of faith.
It's trusting even when it doesn't make sense.
And that tension is something we can probably all relate to.
Oh, absolutely. We all have those moments where we hear a call or have a hunch that seems to go against all reason.
It's scary, isn't it? To trust that inner voice when it's telling you to do something that seems totally illogical.
It is, but sometimes those illogical promptings lead to the most amazing breakthroughs.
And so they lower the nets. And what happens?
Oh, wait.
They're suddenly overflowing with fish. So many fish that their nets start to break.
No way.
They even have to call for help from their partners in another boat.
Wow, it's more than just a good day of fishing.
It's a miracle. But what's the deeper significance? Is it just about obedience or is there something more?
I think it's about the abundance that becomes available when we align ourselves with God's will.
It's like when we let go of our own limited perspective and surrender to something greater, we open ourselves up to possibilities we could never have imagined.
It's about trusting the process, even when we don't understand it.
But surrender can be hard.
It can.
I mean, look at Simon Peter's reaction. He falls at Jesus' knees and says, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." It's almost like Isaiah's woe is me all over again.
It's interesting, isn't it? Both Isaiah and Simon Peter have these very different encounters with the divine Isaiah, with the vision of God's holiness, and Simon Peter with this experience of overwhelming abundance, but they both react with this sense of unworthiness.
It's like both the divine presence and the divine power can reveal the gap between our humanity and God's perfection.
And I think that recognition of our own limitations is an essential part of answering the call.
It's when we acknowledge our need for something beyond ourselves that we become truly open to receiving guidance.
That humility allows us to be led, to be taught, to be transformed.
So how does Jesus respond to Simon Peter's plea?
He says, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men." It's a powerful call to discipleship, to leave behind the familiar and follow a new path.
And does Simon Peter hesitate this time?
No, he doesn't. The text tells us that he and his partners left everything and followed him. It's a complete surrender to the call, even though it means stepping into the unknown and embracing a new identity.
So we've come full circle, from Isaiah's dramatic vision in the temple to this miraculous catch of fish on the lake. It seems like each encounter, each call, is unique and personal.
It is.
Yet they all share this common thread of recognizing a power greater than ourselves.
In responding with a mix of fear, awe, and ultimately a willingness to step forward in faith.
It's not about having a perfect faith or knowing all the answers.
It's about trusting the journey, even when we don't know where it's going to lead.
And being open to the transformative power of saying yes to the call.
And isn't that what makes it so exciting? The unknown, the adventure of it all.
Absolutely. It's like stepping out of our comfort zones and into the vastness of God's plan, trusting that we'll be guided and supported every step of the way.
It's a beautiful and terrifying thing all at the same time.
I love that you said beautiful and terrifying because I think that's exactly what these readings evoke.
It's the essence of faith, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so compelling.
So what do you think?
I think we've barely scratched the surface of what it means to answer the call.
There's so much more to unpack here.
There is, but I think it's a good place to pause and let our listeners reflect on what we've explored so far. What are your thoughts?
What have resonated with you?
Or what felt challenging? Did you connect more with Isaiah's fear or Simon Peter's bold decision?
Whatever your experience, we invite you to sit with these stories, to let them stir something within you.
Because we believe that the same power that worked through Isaiah, Simon Peter, and Paul is still at work in the world today.
It's calling each of us to something more, something greater.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore what it might look like to answer that call in our own lives.
So stay tuned. There's so much more to discover.
Until then, keep diving deep.
And keep listening.
And keep listening.
As we continue our deep dive, I'm really curious to hear what resonated with you from those readings.
Yeah, what really stood out to you?
Was there anything that surprised you or maybe even felt a little bit challenging?
Did you connect with Isaiah's initial fear in that vision?
Or maybe you were more drawn to Simon Peter's decision to just drop everything and follow Jesus?
I think it's so interesting how we can have such different responses to these encounters with the divine.
That's the beauty of it, right? We're all coming from different places.
We're all on our own unique journeys.
And yet we're united by this common experience of encountering something bigger than ourselves.
And that encounter always seems to lead to this call.
That stirring within us to do something more, be something more.
Like a nudge from the universe saying, hey, there's more to life than this.
And that can be pretty daunting, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, facing those big existential questions, grappling with our own limitations, our imperfections.
It's so much easier to just stay comfortable, stay safe in the familiar.
Yeah, to avoid the unknown, the uncomfortable.
But I think it's often in those moments of discomfort, when we really acknowledge our need for something beyond ourselves, that real transformation happens.
Like Isaiah allowing himself to be purified by that burning coal, or Simon Peter confessing his sinfulness before Jesus.
It's in those moments of surrender, of humility, that we open ourselves up to new possibilities.
We create space for a power that can work through us in extraordinary ways.
And what's really cool is that answering the call doesn't always have to be this big, dramatic, life-altering decision.
Sometimes it's about those small everyday choices.
Right, like seemingly insignificant acts of kindness or courage.
Like volunteering at a local soup kitchen or mentoring a young person.
Or even just offering a listening ear to someone who needs it.
Those acts, though they may seem small, can ripple outwards and have a huge impact.
Because answering the call, at its heart, is about recognizing our interconnectedness, our responsibility to one another.
It's about playing our part in building a more just and compassionate world.
It's about recognizing that spark of the divine within each of us.
And allowing it to shine outwards, illuminating the path for ourselves and for others. I think what resonates most with me from these readings is the courage it takes to just say yes.
To step forward, even when you're afraid, even when you doubt.
Yeah, that courage isn't always easy to come by.
No, it's not something we conjure up on our own. It's a gift.
A grace that flows from that encounter with the divine.
The more we surrender to the call, the more we open ourselves up to that strength and guidance.
It's like we're tapping into a power source that's always available to us.
Remember Isaiah and Simon Peter, they both felt unworthy.
Yet they still stepped forward.
They said yes, and their lives were forever changed.
And Paul, too. From persecuting Christians to spreading this message of love and forgiveness.
Incredible.
I mean, it's mind-blowing.
It is. And their stories offer us not just entertainment,
But inspiration.
a reminder that the same power that worked through them is available to us today.
So if you're feeling that nudge, that call, that stirring within you,
Maybe the question isn't, am I worthy?
but what if I said yes?
What might be possible if we, like Isaiah, like Simon Peter, like Paul, dared to trust the call and step into the unknown?
What gifts might we discover within ourselves?
What abundance might flow into our lives and the lives of those around us?
Maybe in answering that call, we might find ourselves becoming part of something much greater than ourselves.
Woven into this tapestry of a world being transformed by love, compassion, hope.
It's a beautiful thought, isn't it?
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive,
I invite you to hold these questions close.
reflect on those calls you hear in your own life.
Those whispers of possibility that invite you to step forward.
In faith.
Encourage.
And remember, the power that transformed Isaiah, Simon Peter, and Paul is available to you.
It's waiting to be unleashed.
So let's see where this journey takes us.
As we wrap up our deep dive into answering the call, I find myself thinking about all the different ways people responded.
Yeah.
We saw Isaiah's boldness, proclaiming God's message,
Right.
and then Simon Peter, who was kind of reluctant at first.
But then made that radical decision to leave it all behind.
And Paul, too. His whole life just did a total 180.
Yeah, talk about a transformation. It really seems like there's no one right way to answer the call.
Like a cookie-cutter approach.
Right,
It's
exactly.
so personal,
Yeah.
It really is tailored to each individual person, their unique situation.
Their gifts, their challenges.
And it often requires us to really confront those fears and doubts,
Those voices that say we're not good enough.
or that we're not ready.
Those voices can be so loud, can't they?
Yeah, they can be deafening.
They can keep us stuck, prevent us from really stepping into who we're meant to be.
But these readings remind us that those feelings of unworthiness, they don't have to have the final say.
Right.
Like, remember when Isaiah's unclean lips were purified by that burning coal?
Oh, yeah, that was intense.
And Simon Peter, when he confessed his sinfulness, and Jesus just met him with such compassion.
Those are such powerful moments.
Those moments of humility, of recognizing our need for something bigger than ourselves.
I think those are often the catalyst for real change.
Like, that's when we open ourselves up to grace, to guidance.
We create space for something new to emerge.
And it's not about being perfect.
Or having it all figured out.
It's about being willing to say yes, even when it's scary.
Even when we doubt, even when we feel totally unprepared.
Yeah, it's about trusting that same power that worked through Isaiah and Simon Peter and Paul.
Trusting that it's available to us too.
And that if we answer the call, we might just discover a purpose and a meaning that we never thought possible.
That's pretty amazing thought.
It is, right?
It is.
So as we finish up this deep dive, I want to leave you with some questions to think about.
Yeah, I like it.
What calls are you hearing in your life right now?
What's stirring within you?
What's making you feel a little bit restless, maybe?
What fears or doubts are holding you back?
And what could happen if, like, those figures from centuries past, you decided to say yes to that adventure of faith?
It's kind of exciting to think about, isn't it?
It is. Remember that overflowing net of fish?
Oh yeah, the one that almost broke.
It's such a great reminder that when we align ourselves with something greater than ourselves, we tap into a power that can just overflow into every area of our lives.
It's about trusting the process, even when it doesn't make logical sense.
So as you go about your day, listen for those calls, embrace the challenge
And step forward.
with courage, with faith.
We believe in you.
We really do. And we can't wait to see what amazing things you accomplish when you answer that call that's meant just for you.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
And keep listening for that call.